There has never been another NBA player even remotely close to being like Dikembe Mutombo. The Finger Wag, the 4 Defensive Player of the Year awards, the hospital that he built in his mother's name. So for episode 3, we decided to figure out how exactly did Dikembe Mutombo become one of one.
Put it up on the poster.
If you followed sports in the 90s or pop culture at any time since, you're familiar with his signature move. It became such a sensation that it transcended his sport, made it into the mainstream, and at the mere mention of his name, this is the first thing that comes to mind. I'm talking, of course, about Michael Buffer.
Let's get ready to rumble!
It's been 40 plus years since Michael Buffer started kicking off boxing matches with "Let's Get Ready to Rumble." And since then, those choice 5 words and his voice have seeped into every pore of pop culture. The phrase has been featured in dozens of movies. It's been on South Park, The Simpsons, and a video game that came out in 1999. Buffer trademarked that sentence in 1992, and by 2009, ABC News said that trademark had generated $400 million in revenue. Let's Get Ready to Rumble has become a fixture in pop music, from the opening track of Jock Jams in 1995 to a French Montana track in 2024, from a Tupac song in 1996 to the intro of country star Josh Turner's 2012 album, Punching Bag. And you know something's made it big when advertisers start to make puns on it. For, I don't know, car insurance.
Let's get ready to bundle!
Or, I'm just going off the top of my head here, cheese.
Introducing Kraft Natural Cheese Crumbles.
Kraft was getting real loose with the crumble-based puns because in that same commercial, they squeezed in another.
The Crumbelievable.
New Kraft Crumbles.
In 2019, almost 25 years after Michael Buffer was featured on Jock Jams, Disney was promoting a new live-action remake, and it knew exactly what to put in commercials.
Let's get ready for Gumbo! Rated PG.
You're not going to believe this, but there was a time when the phrase "Let's Get Ready to Rumble" was a novel thing. In the early to mid-90s, we'd hear "Let's Get Ready to Rumble" and just whip ourselves into a frenzy, really just work ourselves up. And we'd rumbled before, don't get me wrong, we had rumbled. But to have someone with such authority say, "We're not rumbling yet, but just a heads up, the rumbling is about to happen. So get ready, whatever that looks like for you, stretch, or if there's someone you need to contact." So in 1994, when the city of Denver had its 2 biggest professional basketball games in a very, very long time, the Nuggets tapped the city's all-time biggest sports hero, John Elway, to come out and get the crowd pumped for the city's newest sports hero in the freshest way imaginable.
So let's get ready to Mutombo!
I'm going to tell you, as a kid growing up in the Denver area in 1994, I'd almost certainly never heard something that I liked more. And honestly, I'm surprised the whole state of Colorado survived the sheer cultural earthquake that came from a variation of "Let's Get Ready to Rumble" coming out of the mouth of the owner of John Elway Chevrolet in Englewood, Colorado. And all of this happened at the height of Denver's Mutombo Mania.
The Denver Nuggets select Dikembe Mutombo from Georgetown University. 7'1", 230 pounds. Went to Institute Moboto in Kinshasa, Zaire.
Almost immediately after the Denver Nuggets drafted Dikembe Mutombo in 1991, marketing folks got busy finding as many ways as possible to capitalize on the rapidly spreading, feverish fascination with number 55. McDonald's was one of the many places trying to make the most of the fact that the name Dikembe Mutombo was unlike almost anything most Americans had ever heard.
For $2.99, Dr. Jumbo Mutombo meal there.
Adidas banked on the idea that Mutombo was making defense cool.
Man does not fly in the house of Mutombo.
And the Nuggets were calling attention to the fact that Mutombo was very large. The team handed out signs at games that said Mount Mutombo, 5,287 feet, which was Denver's altitude as the mile-high city, plus Mutombo's height of 7 feet and a few inches. If you had shut the door to my childhood bedroom, you would have revealed a life-size poster of Dikembe Mutombo. He wasn't dunking or blocking a shot. He was just standing there, smiling, with his long arms hanging at his side, arms that in real life stretched to a 7-foot 7-inch wingspan. But this poster also had Mutombo's full name: Dikembe Mutombo Mpolondo Mukamba Jacques Wamutombo. I don't know many of my best friends' middle names. Most of the time, I just assume my friend's middle name is Michael. It feels like a safe enough bet. Eric, Michael. Justin, Michael. Michael. But I know all of Dikembe's names. I stared at all 7 names on that poster for probably 10 of the most formative years of my life. And also, I know them because the US media could not resist commenting on how long his name was. The New York Times in 1991, a few months into Mutombo's rookie year, said, quote, his full name in itself is a paragraph, before writing the full thing. Dick Enberg called it out when announcing the 1992 All-Star Game.
That is Dikembe Mutombo's full name. He said he wants to see his name in lights. Boy, it's going to take a lot of neon.
Really, Dick? We're commenting on other people's names now, Dick. Dickenberg. We're doing this? In 1998, when Mutombo made an appearance on Late Night with Conan O'Brien 2 days before playing in his 5th All-Star game, Conan had to bring it up.
Let me start and say it. Dikembe Mutombo.
Mpolondo, Mukamba, Dikembe Jacque Wamutombo.
Forget it, okay.
That's rich, coming from Conan Michael O'Brien. I looked it up. It's Conan Christopher. From pretty much the time Mutombo arrived in the United States, he had to deal with our gawky circus audience reactions to things he had no control over, which, in addition to his name and his height, always included his size 22 shoes.
How big, what size are you?
22.
What?
22.
This is a 22!
Mutombo said the first time it snowed in Washington, D.C., after he'd moved from Zaire to attend Georgetown, his fellow students knocked on his door and windows in a frenzy, saying, Mutombo, come out! Snow! He told Sports Illustrated about this and said, quote, they were so stupid. They thought I came from the bush, not a city of 4 million. They thought I'd never seen snow. I told them they were crazy, that there is snow on the mountains in eastern Zaire all the time. Mutombo also explained, quote, I don't blame the students. I blame the American system of education. Now, before Americans get all butthurt about that, just know that Mutombo could have said the American system of education was busted in English, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Lingala, Chiluba, and 3 African dialects that I struggle to sound out because of the American system of education. In the summer of 1994, he brought NBA players to Africa to help with basketball clinics. The crew he brought was fellow Sinners and Georgetown alums Patrick Ewing and Alonzo Mourning, and Utah Jazz guard John Crotty. It's actually an inspiring group of 4 players. Mutombo, Ewing, and Mourning inspired young players to play better defense and improve their footwork, and Crotty inspired them to go, sorry, who are you? You're a photographer? You're with them? You're with them. Mutombo said the players he traveled with on that trip were shocked to find that he'd never seen a large animal outside of the zoo. He said, quote, they watched Tarzan when they were growing up. Because if Mutombo had to overcome all that our American education system didn't tell us, he also had to overcome what American media did tell us. The movies I saw growing up that took place in Africa were Ace Ventura, When Nature Calls, Congo, Mighty Joe Young, and The Air Up There. All movies that starred white people and took place deep in the jungle or in the bush. In fact, most Americans at the time thought the only way to be in Africa was to be deep in Africa. So yeah, Mutombo was from Kinshasa, a city of millions that famously got itself ready to rumble in 1974 for the Rumble in the Jungle, where Muhammad Ali knocked out George Foreman in front of 60,000 people, a crowd that reportedly included 8-year-old Dikembe Mutombo. But unless Mutombo was somehow from deep in that city, people across the U.S. would respond to being from Kinshasa the same way they did his name, height, and shoe size, by going, now I haven't heard that one before. Honey, come here. Come here, listen to this. It is difficult to quantitatively capture the impact of one player on the game, especially one like Mutombo. You could say 3,289, the number of his career blocks, second most all time. You could say 115.67. That was Mutombo's rating in 1999 for the NBA's IBM Award. The IBM Award was an accolade given out from 1984 to 2002. Here is how it was described to Chicago fans when Michael Jordan won it in 1989.
This unique award honors the player who contributes the most to his team's overall success by utilizing a computer evaluation of key offensive and defensive statistics.
You might know a computer evaluation of key statistics by its other name, a formula. But that explanation was from 1989. People weren't as familiar with formulas, and most of them didn't even know how to get ready to rumble. The IBM Award was an elaborate formula that attempted to objectively measure a player's impact on their team. The winner would get a little laptop, which I'm sure was cool at the time, but does feel like IBM was saying, hey, you're the best player. You win a chance to endorse our product. Michael Jordan won 2 little laptops. David Robinson won a record 5. And in 1999, a shortened season of 50 games because of a lockout, Dikembe Mutombo ran away with it, finishing far ahead of Shaquille O'Neal, Alonzo Mourning, and Karl Malone. But to quantitatively convey the impact of Dikembe Mutombo, I might go with 994. According to Genius.com, Mutombo has been referenced in songs 994 times. And it's not just random artists either. Mutombo has been mentioned by Post Malone, Jay-Z, and Drake. Just 5 years into Mutombo's career, he was mentioned on the Fugees' legendary 1996 album, The Score, on the song The Beast. A year later, 1997, he was mentioned by Nas in the Firm song, Executive Decision. Kanye's name dropped Mutombo at least twice. Youngboy Never Broke Again mentioned Mutombo in 2 tracks released in consecutive years, because if it worked once, let's run it back immediately. And Kendrick Lamar worked Mutombo's name into the Grammy-winning album To Pimp a Butterfly on the track How Much a Dollar Cost. Mutombo is mentioned in more songs than most NBA players have blocked shots. If songs that mention Mutombo were placed on the all-time list for blocked shots, it would rank 106th above Bill Laimbeer, Scottie Pippen, and Draymond Green. It's obviously rare to be a basketball player whose name transcends the sport and becomes synonymous in pop culture with defense, intimidation, and being large. But Mutombo didn't even start playing basketball seriously until he was 16. He only started playing the game because he said his brother and dad decided he should. And look, I don't like to weigh in on family decisions, but to Dikembe's brother and dad, I see how you got there on this one. Within a few years, Mutombo was at Georgetown, but not necessarily for basketball. He said he chose to go to Georgetown in 1987 because he got an academic scholarship, he wanted to be a doctor, and had a cousin who lived nearby. An LA Times article from Mutombo's sophomore year had a quote from Coach John Thompson about how he found out about Mutombo by chance. Thompson said, quote, "A gentleman from a government agency here in Washington walked in and told us about him. I guess the guy had sent a note, but you get a lot of notes. You get pictures from overseas that are very deceptive. If the kid stands back away from the basket and holds the ball up and you take a picture of him, it looks like he's taller than he is. We get a lot of those." Look, John Thompson, we get it. Angles matter. Let it go. Mutombo was an ordinary college kid in that he was in college. He was extraordinary in almost every other way. When he first got to Georgetown, he spent up to 7 hours a day mastering English. He interned at the World Bank and for a sitting U.S. congressman. And by the time he was leaving Georgetown, he had gone from an ignored note on John Thompson's desk to an NBA lottery pick. Even the way he partied was extraordinary. He would apparently go to bars with teammates, and when everyone would stop what they were doing to look at the giant who had just walked through the door, he would say, "Who wants to sex Mutombo?" I'd like to know why John Elway, years later, when getting Denver pumped for a playoff game, didn't yell that, using the Michael Buffer cadence. "Who wants to sex Mutombo?" Mutombo mostly rode the bench at the beginning of his time in college. His main job was to back up Alonzo Mourning for a few minutes here and there and make sure Mourning faced tough competition in practice. It wasn't until a nationally televised game in January of 1989 that the world had a chance to notice.
Tonight, a crowd better than 12,000 has turned out for the resumption of one of the Big East better rivalries, St. John's and Georgetown.
One of the first things you see on this broadcast is Alonzo Mourning, which made sense. Mourning had been the #1 recruit in 1988 ahead of Christian Laettner, Sean Kemp, and St. John's Malik Sealy, to name a few. But anyone who tuned into ESPN to see Mourning had a unexpectedly short window to catch him.
They don't gamble. Got the offensive foul on Mourning.
Yes, second as he tried to jump out for the screen for Smith, and that gets Dikembe Mutombo immediately up off the bench.
Mutombo told the story of what Coach Thompson said to him in that moment years later on the Knuckleheads podcast with Quentin Richardson and Darius Miles.
I don't want you to score. I don't want you to shoot. All I want you to is block shot and rebound like you do against Alonzo Mourning in practice.
If he wasn't supposed to score, Mutombo listened. He had 1 point. And if he was supposed to block shots, he also followed that part of the directions.
Gives it to work there. By Mutombo! Again by Mutombo! Don't bring it in here!
That happened like a lot.
Dikembe Mutombo from Kinshasa, Zaire. Finds Muto. Another one for Mutombo.
By the end of the game, Mutombo had 12 blocks.
That is a new Georgetown record.
It wasn't just the number of blocks that impressed the announcers, it was how Mutombo was blocking shots. He didn't go for shot fakes. His blocks were controlled and kept the ball in play.
I don't know how you teach that.
You know, I wouldn't know how to teach that either. And to be fair, most people don't. But at the time Mutombo was in college, there was one person who definitely did.
Posters! Yeah.
My name is Kojo Asamoah Caesar. I am an attorney here in Tulsa, Oklahoma, but I grew up in Ghana, West Africa, and I lived in Denver, Colorado for 1 year. So Dikembe Mutombo and I have the African connection and also the Denver connection, as that's the team that drafted him, the Nuggets. So my memory of Dikembe, when I was growing up in Ghana. I remember being introduced to Dikembe and the NBA as a whole in 1996. That's when we started getting cable television and started to be able to watch NBA games. And so Hakeem Olajuwon and Dikembe were our favorite players because they were the two popular players from Africa. And Dikembe had the signature finger wag after he would block a shot. And so that became a thing that we would all do on the playground, waving our fingers like Dikembe every time a shot was blocked. And then obviously, beyond just the African players, everybody's favorite player was Michael Jordan, right? So my story is when those two collided, and I believe it was 1996 or 1997 All-Star game, and Dikembe and MJ were on the same team on the East, and behind the scenes in the locker room, Dikembe was telling Michael Jordan, basically teasing him, saying, "You've never dunked on me. You've dunked on all these guys. You've dunked on Patrick Ewing. You've dunked on Alonzo. You've never dunked on me." And MJ's like, "Dikembe, I've dunked on you." Dikembe's like, no, you've never dunked on me." And MJ's like, "Dikembe, you keep lying. We're going to revoke your visa." One of those biting MJ jabs. And so it was a joke, and Phil Jackson is in the room and everybody's laughing. But later on in that season, the Chicago Bulls visit the Atlanta Hawks, and MJ actually goes baseline and dunks over Dikembe and then waves the finger at Dikembe right in the game. So if you guys can find the footage, that would be cool to show. So that was a very cool moment of kind of Africa and MJ colliding, and it was really dope. And that was what Dikembe was about. It was, he just brought a joy to the game and just a fun-loving guy, and did a lot of great things in Africa after his playing days. And so rest in peace, Dikembe Mutombo.
Put it up on a poster.
Hey, real quick before we get back to the episode, maybe you noticed if you were watching the intro, but I am wearing a very cool Atlanta Hawks sweatshirt. It looks vintage, it is very new, and it is very soft. This is from Homage Clothing Company. They've been very good to us. They sent us a very cool, very nice Boston Celtics shirt for our Jason Tatum episode, and now this one for our Dikembe episode. I highly recommend checking them out. All of their stuff is very high quality. They have stuff for all of your favorite sports teams, NBA, WNBA, football, if you suffer from that affliction. We'll put a link in our episode description. Go check them out. Anything you buy through that link also supports our show, which we're very grateful for. So thanks for listening.
Put it up on a poster.
For networks televising basketball games, halftime is tricky. Networks have to find a way to keep us from changing the channel while the players we tuned in to watch are getting hydrated or getting their ankles wrapped, or as Coach Chauncey Billups once tattled on one of his players for checking their mentions.
We're down like 18 at the half. He had a nasty dunk. We coming out for the third quarter. This motherfucker then posted his dunk on his joint. Stop it. At halftime.
Players are posting their dunks instead of doing their jobs. I spend all day posting their dunks instead of doing my job. Basketball really brings us together, doesn't it? For years, the network's go-to way to keep us engaged during halftime has been getting former players to tell us how the current players are doing. That's why we have so many collective memories of Shaquille O'Neal racing Kenny Smith to a screen to look at plays, or of Julius Erving breaking things down for Bob Costas at halftime of a game Dikembe Mutombo was in back in 1994.
Well, the Nuggets have proved themselves worthy, and that's really what it's all about.
In the 70s and much of the 80s, the NBA was struggling to get people to tune into games at all. And a lot went into that. But part of it was quite simply, people didn't know much about basketball. They didn't know the rules, the fundamentals, and they didn't know the players. So from somewhere in the mid-70s to the early 80s, the NBA on CBS would use part of halftime for something called Red on Roundball, a segment where Boston Celtics legendary coach Red Auerbach would take 3-ish minutes to bring in NBA stars to help give instruction on a specific part of the game.
Now, what you're about to see is some of the great players of our time demonstrating these things, so you better learn them.
Auerbach had Wes Unseld on how to make an outlet pass, dribbling drills with Pete Maravich, and Julius Erving on the art of the dunk.
There you saw the highest percentage shot in basketball, if you're careful.
For the episode on blocking shots, Auerbach had lots of great choices from some of the league leaders in blocks at the time, like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Elvin Hayes, or Nate Thurmond, who is now remembered for a rare combo of being generationally swole and having a generational case of male pattern baldness at a young age. But Auerbach decided to go with someone who'd been retired for years, and his reasoning was pretty hard to argue with.
Bill Russell, in my opinion, the greatest basketball player that ever played the game.
On the court with Bill Russell was Bob McAdoo and Tiny Archibald, two of the league's best players at the time, so they wore their respective team uniforms. They would put up shots to be blocked by Russell, who was coaching the Seattle Supersonics at the time, so he was wearing a Sonics polo shirt. And I'll say, as someone who's played basketball in a fair amount of parks, if an old man shows up to the court in his work clothes, you're about to get cooked. Russell explained his moves and his decision-making, while Auerbach is at half court just straight up interjecting.
Now, that is what is called intimidation.
For a good chunk of this segment, Russell doesn't even block shots, which Auerbach explains is the point.
There's more to blocking the shot than blocking the shot.
It is true that there is more to blocking a shot than blocking a shot. But also, Bill Russell blocked a lot of shots. So Red, come on, just tell us how to do it. When I say that Bill Russell blocked a lot of shots, I mean that the official count of his career block shots was a lot. The league didn't track blocks until after he retired, but a few years ago, a user on Reddit went back to watch games and read articles to piece together Russell's general blocks per game number. I haven't fact-checked or verified these numbers. The way they did it looks legit, but again, this came from a random user on Reddit. So it is possible that this is all somehow part of a scheme to convince us that NFTs aren't dead yet. For context, the 2024-25 season's leader in blocks was Walker Kessler. He averaged 2.4 blocks per game. The highest recorded career average for blocks belongs to Mark Eaton with 3.5. Eaton also has the highest recorded average in a season at about 5.5. What this Reddit review found was that Russell likely averaged about 8.1 blocks per game. That's at least 8 times a game that Russell demoralized the shooter, and hopefully 8 times a game that Arbach leaned back and went, now that is what I call intimidation. One of Bill Russell's best season was 1964-65. He won the league MVP and had at least 2 separate games with quadruple doubles, likely recording 12 blocks both times. The next season, 65-66, was also one of his best. He probably had even more games with double-digit blocks, including one where he blocked at least 25 shots. And not to take anything away from Bill Russell, but once a team gets 15 shots blocked by the same player, that's a coaching problem. 25 shots? Where was the coach on that one? Even an assistant to be like, hey, so drive into the hoop. Not working. I'm thinking once we get past half court, we just fling that thing up. Just get it in the air. One of the big guys on the Celtics bench for both of those seasons, doing some combination of backing up Bill Russell and just watching Bill Russell in awe, was a 6', 10" power forward named John Thompson. The same John Thompson who would stop playing in the NBA after these 2 seasons, take up coaching, eventually get the head coaching job at Georgetown University in 1972, and eventually find out that a giant kid from Zaire was coming to his school for academics. So when it was time to get this tall kid up to speed, as well as develop the highly touted Alonzo Mourning, John Thompson went to the guy he had watched from the bench, the person that Red Auerbach had trusted to teach a whole generation about shot blocking, Bill Russell.
I would kick your ass.
Mutombo has said in numerous interviews over the years that the mentorship he got from Russell changed the trajectory of his whole life.
He said, the only way you can walk away and being one of the great basketball ever played this game, if you can just do 2 things in your career, block, shot, and rebound.
If Mutombo was supposed to block and rebound, just like that game in 1989 against St. John, he followed directions well. By the time his career was all over, Mutombo led the NBA in rebounds 2 different times and in blocks 3 times. He was an 8-time All-Star, 3-time All-NBA, on the All-Defensive Team 6 times, and was a 4-time winner of the Defensive Player of the Year, the first player to ever do that. But there was another piece of wisdom from that lineage of basketball greatness that he seemed to take to heart.
Let's get into it. With the sneakers, Mutombo had big man shoes. 92 to 96, big men had sneakers on lock. When they talked about basketball shoes, you were either talking about Jordans or you were talking about a big man shoe. Until Jason Kidd and the other people, you weren't wearing guard shoes. So Shaq, Charles Barkley, Dikembe Mutombo, Patrick Ewing, Vin Baker. Dikembe Mutombo had some of the best high tops. And I say best high tops because his emblem, and emblems are big now, especially with sneakers, but his emblem was his family shield with his number inside. Also, his Adidas had kente cloth on them. And I mean kente cloth before it was being kneeled in and somebody was throwing the fist up. I'm not saying any names, Pelosi. I remember them being slightly popular back in the day. I think they did get a re-release in the early aughts and had a bigger impact. I could be wrong. I think that part of the proceeds of his sneaker sales went to his home. He did a lot of philanthropy. He did a lot of philanthropy. Can we chop that up? It's getting warm in here. Your boy tongue twisted over the word philanthropy. Shout out to the kente cloth. Shout out to the Adidas. Shout out to the Dikembe Mutombo. Rest up to the legend.
John Elway, co-owner of Elway's Tap Room and Grill at Denver International Airport, told Denver Nuggets fans to get ready to Mutombo before Game 3 of the 1994 playoffs. The problem was that the 8-seed Nuggets were up against the top-seeded Seattle Supersonics, which had the best record in the league, and since this was year 1 of Michael Jordan's first retirement, the Sonics were the favorite to win it all. The Sonics had one of the most memorable rosters of the whole decade. Gary Payton, Detlef Schrempf, Kendall Gill, Nate McMillan, and of course, the team's leading scorer, one of the greatest, most ferocious dunkers of all time, and the cover of my 5th grade homework folder, the Rain Man, Shawn Kemp. If Michael Jordan dunked in a way that made you feel like he was flying, Shawn Kemp dunked in a way that made you feel like the building was gonna come down around him.
Out of the blocks on fire.
It wasn't just that the Nuggets were heavy underdogs in the series, it's that by the time the series got to Denver, it was all but over. Back then, an NBA first-round series was the best of 5 games, and the Sonics stomped the Nuggets in Game 1 and Game 2.
Sonics up 2 games to none now over Denver, 97-87.
So the Nuggets were 48 minutes from leaving the playoffs like NBA journeyman Alton Lister after Shawn Kemp's most famous dunk, crumbled to the ground as if made of dust, with Kemp standing over, pointing with both hands. So for John Elway, owner of arena football team the Colorado Crush, to deliver Let's Get Ready to Mutombo with such vigor, such enthusiasm was actually quite bold. But the Nuggets jumped out to a huge lead and won Game 3 by 17. So before Game 4, Elway was back with the same pregame hype up, and his reasoning was pretty hard to argue with.
We did it on Monday night, and we're going to do it tonight.
Sure enough, the Nuggets won again, this time in overtime. Game 5 went back to Seattle. That's the game I referenced earlier when Julius Erving broke down the first half for Bob Costas.
The Nuggets are leading because they put forth more effort than the Sonics.
This is, of course, the game that ended with a Nuggets overtime victory, making them the first 8 seed to beat a 1 seed in NBA playoff history.
Mukamba embraces the ball and the unlikely upset. One of the great upsets in NBA playoff history.
The game that ended with one of the most memorable images of Mutombo's career and of NBA history. Mutombo on the ground, grasping the ball above him, eyes closed, mouth wide, somewhere between a laugh and tears of joy. I have long considered Mutombo holding the ball to be one of the defining images of my childhood, but if I'm being honest with you, I did not see it in real time. That game started at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time, which means it started at 9:30 a.m. in Seattle. And we can all agree that's too early. I have a personal rule that I would never open myself up to get dunked on by Shawn Kemp before 10 a.m. If McDonald's is still serving breakfast, it's too early to get dunked on by Shawn Kemp. Where I was in Colorado, the game started at 10:30 a.m. I tragically had a soccer game at that same time. A soccer game I rode to in the back of my parents' red Ford Aerostar. Driving to a soccer game in the back of a red Ford Aerostar is one of the most 90s suburban things that has ever been done. The only thing that would have made it more 90s suburban is if I was doing the Macarena while arguing with my friends whether Marilyn Manson had a rib removed. Luckily, Ford Aerostars had a feature that was truly life-altering. A headphone jack and radio controls in the middle of the van. So I pulled on headphones and sat in the parking lot of that soccer field listening to every second of the game until the Nuggets pulled it out.
The Denver Nuggets, youngest in the NBA, have beaten the team with the best record in the NBA.
And yeah, missing all of warm-ups and barely making kickoff to listen to a game for another sport might have been a sign that my heart wasn't in soccer. But again, this was the 90s in the suburbs. You either played soccer or did martial arts in a strip mall. You had to choose one, and Carlos Valderrama's hair got to me before Jean-Claude Van Damme doing the splits. No problem. In the 5-game series against the Supersonics, Mutombo blocked 31 shots.
Mutombo, 31 blocks. That's an NBA record for a 5-game series.
That's 6+ blocks a game, enough to make everyone in the league go, this guy is for real, and enough to make Bill Russell go, that is a cute little start. Mutombo blocked almost 12% of shots during the series that were taken while he was on the floor. But there's more to blocking a shot than blocking a shot. Mutombo's teammate Robert Pack, who had a breakout series of his own,
Player pass for Pack. Boy, can he leap.
Said, quote, you think about the 6 blocks, but you think about maybe the other 7 that he altered, and maybe the 5 more that he just discouraged guys from coming into the lane. Sports Illustrated said, quote, Mutombo single-handedly turned a jamming team into a jump shooting team. After that season, the coach of the Houston Rockets, Rudy Tomjanovich, who looks a little bit like Colorado's most famous recipient of LASIK eye surgery, John Elway, Tomjanovich said that if the Nuggets can keep getting young shooters to allow Mutombo to focus on rebounding and defense, they could win titles, quote, just the way Boston won titles with Bill Russell. Much like the poster version of him on the wall behind my bedroom door, Mutombo fit perfectly in Denver. He'd be seen around town going to his favorite restaurants, like the one he went to during a segment for NBA Inside Stuff.
This is where I eat almost every day. What's the name of the store? Pasta. It was named after pasta.
In that same segment, it's revealed that Mutombo drove a van. Huge news for those of us who listen to his games in the back of vans. It appears Mutombo spent his newfound NBA riches to get a Chevrolet G20 Weekender Edition, one of the nice vans from the 80s and 90s that had the commander seats in the middle that could rotate. And vans are a smart investment, especially if you're over 7 feet tall and are probably uncomfortable in most vehicles. But there is something humble about Mutombo driving to the arena in the same type of van that my Scoutmaster took us to camp in. The Nuggets hoped that Mutombo would be cruising around Denver for a very long time, or at least that's what I hear from what the team's coach Dan Issel said about Mutombo on a different episode of Inside Stuff.
We have basically built this team around Dikembe, and we plan on him being our center and being our all-star center for the next 10 or 12 years.
What Mutombo brought to Denver was a sense of possibility. The 1994 Sports Illustrated article about Mutombo entitled World Class talks about the future that the Nuggets envisioned with number 55 at the center. The Nuggets president at the time showed the plans for what we now know as Ball Arena. Denver, at the time, was an even smaller sports market than it is now, which the Nuggets president said made it hard to support the team. The plans were the Nuggets organization's attempt to be a lasting part of a city that was about to rapidly change. The plans for the arena included a connection to Denver's new, at the time, light rail system, which to this day is how many Nuggets fans get to games. The plans connected the arena to a new children's museum, countless restaurants, and a nearby amusement park that are all now within walking distance. The potential for basketball in the area was completely tied up with Mutombo. The president explained the reason he felt such urgency to keep the area and the organization competitive was, quote, you look at Mutombo and you say, how do we lock him up long term? The team in the city knew that Mutombo was special and were literally remaking the city's footprint with his size 22 shoes in mind.
I think one of the things that gets lost in all of it is that prior to Dikembe Mutombo, the Nuggets had been going through a really, really terrible period. I mean, they were a national punchline. They didn't win 10 games. And it was just Denver was an afterthought. The Nuggets were a joke. And then suddenly when they drafted him, it was real. We became like a contender. And again, that team, beat Seattle in the playoffs. And that was a very fun, exciting team. The Denver Nuggets re-entered the conversation of the NBA, but prior to that, it had been sort of a wasteland. And then Dikembe showed up and things started to turn around. But he was kind of folkloric in Denver. I mean, how could he not be? He's such an interesting international giant, finger-wagging figure. But I remember something, and again, this is just like a thing you would hear. I have no idea if it was true or not, but people would say that he was so tall that his car, he had to remove the driver's seat. And he would sit in the back seat of the car and drive from the back. And again, this is probably just things kids say, one of those weird myths about Dikembe Mutombo. But I remember driving around Denver, anytime I'd see a nice car, I'd check to see if there was no driver's seat. And then instead, Dikembe Mutombo was just sitting in the back, driving from the back. finger wagging at the kids. Wear your seatbelt, kids. But I never saw him. But I think that speaks to the sort of mythical figure that he was in Denver. And it was just fun because prior to that, it was just, we were a joke. And now we had this figure that was interesting, that you would make up things about, that everybody knew. And as a kid in a flyover city, having a figure like that everyone knows, that's associated with your town, it's everything. I don't care what seat in the car he sits in. I really don't.
Yeah. Mutombo bought into that version of the future as well. When his contract was up in 1996, he asked the Nuggets for a 10-year contract, hoping to stay in Denver for what would have been most of his career. But the team had never quite returned to its 94 playoff form. So Mutombo's request sounded like too much for general manager and coach Bernie Bickerstaff, who modern basketball fans might recognize as the dad of Pistons coach J.B. Bickerstaff, and who Denver sports fans only remember as the man who made Dikembe Mutombo walk without getting anything in return. Bickerstaff would later say that letting Mutombo go was his only regret with the Nuggets, and I usually don't like to weigh in on people's emotions, but to Bernie Bickerstaff, I see how you got there on this one. The Atlanta Hawks gave Mutombo the biggest offer, so that's where he went. And two things can be true. Mutombo has said that it took a long time to heal from Denver not signing him, but that he also took to Atlanta immediately. Decades later in an interview, he said about Atlanta, quote, "This is home for me. All my babies are born here," adding, "This is where I want to spend the rest of my life." With the Hawks, Mutombo racked up accolades on elite defensive teams that had elite jerseys. In 2001, he was traded mid-season to the Philadelphia 76ers to play alongside Allen Iverson. Despite winning his fourth and final Defensive Player of the Year award, Mutombo, like everyone else on the planet in the year 2001, could not stop or even really remotely contain the force that was Shaquille O'Neal. And the 76ers lost to the Lakers in the finals 4-1. There were one-season stops in New Jersey with the Nets and in New York with the Knicks. And finally, in 2004, he landed in Houston, where he finished out his 18-year career backing up Yao Ming, best known as the founder of Yao Family Wines in Napa Valley, California. Mutombo's career came full circle. Just like Georgetown in the late 80s, a legend of the game was mentoring a promising talent trying to adapt to life in the U.S. Only this time, the legend was Dikembe Mutombo.
Hey, it's Mike Johnson. I'm the mayor of Denver. If you were to ask me the best Dikembe Mutombo moment, it's got to be the 1994 playoff series against the Supersonics. We come in as the number 8 seed. They're the number 1 seed. But not only that, we are down 2-0. No team in history at that point had ever won as number 8 seed, let alone down 2-0. But if you're Dikembe and you grew up with 10 siblings in the DRC and you speak 8 or 9 languages, nothing seems impossible. He averages almost 6 blocks a game in that series and delivers the historic win that is now captured in the spirit of Denver, because we now always believe you're never out, even if you're down 2-0 against the number 1 seed. Thanks, Dikembe.
Dikembe Mutombo blocked 3,289 shots in his career. But, of course, there is more to blocking 3,289 shots than blocking 3,289 shots. Specifically for Mutombo, there was the block and the celebration that followed.
And Dikembe says no. Clarence and Mutombo's
No. Mutombo shaking his finger.
Yes. Mutombo terminates it.
Mutombo knocks it down his throat.
If someone who isn't into basketball knows one thing about Dikembe Mutombo, it's likely the finger wag. I told my partner I was doing an episode on Dikembe Mutombo, and they silently raised a finger and waved it back and forth. Mutombo told BuzzFeed in 2014 that when he first came into the league, he would, quote, "shake my head when I used to block shots." He added, "I really didn't have a signature. I had to come up with something for when I was dominating a game." The writer of that article explained the origin a little more bluntly, saying, quote, "Sneaker companies were dishing out multi-million-dollar endorsement deals to the league's best and best-known players, and Mutombo knew he needed to establish a marketable trademark move. Basketball fans loved it. Non-basketball fans loved it. But the NBA really wasn't into it for quite a while. In 1994, the NBA began to make rule changes to make games less intense and physical. The rules limited zone defenses, hand checking, and trash talking. When an NBA representative came to talk to the Nuggets about the new rules, Mutombo apparently asked, quote, "You're telling me I can't say, 'Get that shit out of here'?" When the rep said, "Yes," Mutombo's follow-up was, "How about, don't bring that shit in here?" Very few of us will ever get the chance to honor Mutombo by wagging our finger in a professional setting. But repeatedly using the word shit in a work meeting, I think we could all stand to do a little more of that. For years, the NBA and Mutombo went back and forth on the finger wag, giving him technicals, fines, even at one point banning it outright. Part of this, as Mutombo explained to David Letterman in 2001, was because coaches and players hated it.
It's because you were hurting people's feelings? Is that what this was?
They say I was just embarrassing them in national TV.
Mutombo did point his finger at one team for being particularly butthurt.
I think we play against Boston, and I have like a 12 block shot, and Rick Pitino, who was the coach by then, didn't appreciate the way I was waving my finger to his player.
Mutombo and the league ultimately landed on a compromise. Mutombo couldn't wag his finger at players, but he could wave it at the crowd.
Wagging Steve Smith. Rejection by Mutombo. And notice the wagging of the finger not at Scottie Pippen in the direction of the crowd.
Mutombo's finger wag followed the Let's Get Ready to Rumble trajectory. It was copied by other NBA players, perhaps none more clearly paying homage to Mutombo than Serge Ibaka and Bismack Biyombo, who were both, like Mutombo, from the Democratic Republic of Congo. The finger moved into other sports. J.J. Watt in the NFL and catcher Miguel Montero in baseball after tagging someone out at home. And just like when the rest of us say picks or it didn't happen, if you have a signature move, it's a commercial or it didn't happen. In 2013, Mutombo made his Super Bowl debut with a commercial for Geico where he blocks everyday items, laundry, a piece of trash, a used coffee filter.
That's a fifth floor problem.
Not in my house.
The finger wag did change how players interacted with Mutombo on the court. Sean Kemp would say decades after they met in the 94 playoffs that, quote, once he started to wag that finger, guys would get caught up and really try to challenge him. That's the same dynamic that led to the scene in the documentary The Last Dance between Mutombo and Michael Jordan about how Jordan had never dunked on Mutombo.
In the league. Mike, come on, man. You can't be for real. You haven't got me yet.
When Jordan finally did dunk on Mutombo, number 23 wagged his finger back at number 55. But the finger wag changed how people interacted with him off the court as well. In 2015, Mutombo wrote an article for the Players Tribune saying, quote, everywhere I go, people wag their finger at me. They wag, I wag back. I love it. When Dikembe Mutombo passed away at the end of 2024, news that was tragic and for most of us shocking, TV shows and YouTube and social media filled with images of Mutombo wagging his finger. Former NBA player and coach Avery Johnson gave an interview after Mutombo's death and told a story about his wife playing the big fella in a game of ping pong on an NBA cruise.
And she ended up beating Mutombo in ping pong on this cruise. And she said, not in my house, not in my house.
The love and grief that I witnessed on social media for Dikembe Mutombo resembled the type of outpouring that's usually reserved for the biggest pop stars, the ones that made music or movies that filled our lives for decades. And that makes sense. Mutombo was quite literally more than a basketball player. Best put the day after Mutombo's death by his friend, collaborator, and then Toronto Raptors president, Masai Ujiri.
As big as his big shoes were, as big as his hands were, he was bigger as a person, and his heart was bigger.
Dikembe Mutombo brought out the best in those of us who knew him first through basketball. He made cities like Denver see the potential in a future that included basketball. He made the kids living in those cities with posters of him behind their bedroom doors see the same. He made opposing players play harder and jump higher. On many of his trips back to Africa, he brought David Stern, directly influencing the commissioner to create the league's philanthropic arm, NBA Cares, in 2005. But who he was and what his loss meant was even bigger for the people who knew him first and foremost off the court, something Masai Ujiri could personally speak to as well.
You can't imagine going to Dikembe Mutombo's village, with him and the hero that he is in Kinshasa, but the hero he is in Africa.
In 2015, at his Hall of Fame enshrinement, Mutombo shared that even though he'd left medicine behind for basketball decades before, his focus had never really changed.
My life mission is to continue to change the living condition of the people in Africa.
He was integral in launching Basketball Without Borders Africa and later NBA Africa. He paid for the Zaire women's basketball team's jerseys so they could play internationally. In 1997, he created the Dikembe Mutombo Foundation, which was devoted to improving health outcomes across Congo. The foundation opened the Biamba Marie Mutombo Hospital, named after Dikembe's late mother, who died in 1997 when she was unable to get to a hospital. To make that happen, Mutombo got players and owners to chip in money and travel with him, but even more notably, he gave at least $23 million of his own money. The hospital was the biggest in the country, with the most beds and the country's first CT scanner. By 2020, it had treated over 500,000 patients.
This is where we take care of our premature babies. Those babies have an 80% chance to don't make it if they have stayed where they are. You talk about giving life, gift of life. This is it.
Story after story about Mutombo over the years was about how much of his time and energy went towards his mission.
When Mutombo's not on the court, he's in his office reviewing catalogs for medical equipment and supplies and going over the plans for the hospital.
Mutombo seemed to genuinely love the game of basketball, but he also seemed to genuinely understand that the better he was on the court, the better chance he had to achieve his mission off it. Mutombo told BuzzFeed, quote, "From the Finger Wag, I was able to raise many dollars from corporations and individuals to save lives in Africa." I feel like that quote, "From the Finger Wag, he raised so much money to save lives in Africa," sums up Dikembe Mutombo. It was his way of saying, there was more to blocking a shot than blocking a shot.
Yeah.